Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She laughed like she always did when she wanted to make me feel small. I'm not a hug machine, she said, stirring her Dunkin' coffee. The logo turned perfectly toward her coworkers at the next table. They laughed too. I didn't. I just said quietly, "Good. I'm not your ATM either." She choked on her coffee. No one laughed after that. That moment wasn't about the words. It was the pause that followed. The way she looked at me, not with guilt, not even with anger, but with calculation. Like she was already thinking of the next move, the next card to play. Emily had built her life around image. Matching blazers, curated smiles, the constant scent of expensive vanilla lotion and approval. I was the opposite. Hands, calloused from wires and circuits, my world built around fixing what people broke. Every morning, while she scrolled through emails and poured another Pepsi into a glass she never finished, I headed out in my Ford Ranger before sunrise. She called it blue-collar romance, half joking. I thought she liked the contrast. Turns out, she just liked the stability. Lately, her tone had changed. Fewer texts, more late meetings. Her boss, Greg, the kind of man who wore confidence like a cologne, started popping up in her stories. Corporate dinners, strategy sessions, jokes I wasn't supposed to understand. I didn't say anything. Silence can be sharper than confrontation. One night, while she was networking, I opened Venmo. Our shared account told its own story. Tiny charges for dinners I hadn't been invited to. Hotel payments reimbursed by the company. Only they weren't. The numbers didn't lie, even if she did. That's when something inside me clicked. I didn't yell, didn't slam doors. I just stopped being the power source that kept her world spinning. The next morning, she came downstairs, heels clicking like punctuation marks. "You're quiet," she said, sipping her coffee. I nodded, just thinking. About what? About how easy it is to take warmth for granted, until it's gone. She went to work. I stayed behind, unplugging the joint account, redirecting payments, cutting cards one by one. It wasn't revenge. It was balance. By the time she came home, nothing had changed on the surface. But under it, everything had shifted. Tomorrow, she'd find out. And she'd finally understand what real silence costs. The next crack in the floorboards came from someone who never involved himself in our life. Mark, a coworker of mine. The kind of man who never spoke unless the truth forced itself out of him. We were replacing a breaker panel in an old duplex when he asked, almost too casually, if Emily was still working those late mentorship nights with her boss. I didn't answer. He shrugged and said he'd seen Greg and her walking into a hotel lobby last week, both dressed too nicely for a marketing meeting. Then he added, as if it meant nothing, that Greg wasn't the type to mentor without expecting something back. And just like that, the silence inside me shifted from cold to solid. I didn't confront her. Instead, I watched the pattern. Emily came home later and later, always with that corporate glow, her hair fixed perfectly, makeup retouched, the same Dunkin' cup in her hand she'd pretend was from an afternoon run, but had time stamps that didn't lie. She was living in a world where attention was currency and power bought affection. Mine apparently wasn't the kind of power she wanted anymore. One night, while she showered, her phone lit up on the counter. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The preview of a message was enough. Greg wrote, "You handled today perfectly. Same place tomorrow." There were no hearts, no flirting, just business-coded intimacy. Transactional. Exactly her style lately. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance settling into my bones like insulation. Her laughter carried from the bathroom, light and careless. She had no idea I was already gone in every way that mattered. Later, she walked into the kitchen and opened a Pepsi without looking at me. She mentioned casually that her team might get bonuses this quarter, that Greg had hinted at elevating people who really showed commitment. She said it like she wasn't giving herself away with every word. I kept my expression flat. She didn't notice the shift, the way she never noticed anything that didn't orbit her. That night, I checked Venmo again. Payments to restaurants we never visited, charges labeled work dinner, all reimbursed by me. It was undeniable now. But instead of confronting her, I let the weight of it anchor me into a new version of myself. One that didn't explain, didn't warn, didn't chase. By morning, my silence had become something else entirely. Not weakness, not avoidance. Strategy. The kind that makes someone realize too late that you stopped being theirs long before you walked away. The proof didn't come in one explosion. It arrived in small, precise cuts that didn't bleed but left marks all the same. I didn't search her phone, didn't follow her, didn't dig through her things. I just paid attention, the way an electrician reads the hum of a panel before it burns. And the signs were there, steady and rhythmic, like a failing circuit giving its warnings. The first real confirmation slid into view on a Tuesday morning. Emily left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she took a call in the hallway. She wasn't hiding it. She didn't think she had to. The screen was full of calendar invites, private meetings blocked out with her boss, time slots too late for office hours and too frequent to be professional. Notes that read alignment session, review progress, and the one that made everything lock into place. Prepare deliverables for bonus consideration. No mention of her team, just her. She walked in and closed the laptop with a casual laugh, saying she had forgotten something at work. She grabbed her Dunkin' cup on the way out, the straw tapping the lid like a reminder of the world she lived in. Quick, caffeinated, transactional. She didn't notice I was watching her differently now, not with suspicion, but with clarity. Later that night, she told me she was exhausted from another long day, but Venmo told the truth. A dinner charge from a restaurant we'd never been to. The description said client development. I didn't even have to touch her phone. The pattern spelled everything out. She was building a future with someone else's power, using my stability as the safety net below her. The realization didn't hurt as much as it should have. It just settled, like dust on an untouched surface. She moved around the kitchen opening a Pepsi, talking about Greg's strategic vision, her voice bright in the places where mine had gone quiet. She didn't notice the shift in my expression, the way my eyes no longer followed her, the absence of warmth she used to take for granted. She didn't ask if anything was wrong. That would have required looking at me, not through me. That night, I lay awake knowing something she didn't. My silence had just turned into movement. Not loud, not vengeful, not dramatic. The kind of movement that changes everything without announcing itself. The kind that comes right before the lights go out in a room no one realized was wired wrong from the start. The disappearance didn't start with a bag or a slammed door. It began with the quiet decision to stop financing the life she performed in front of everyone else. I woke up before dawn, the house still dark, Emily still asleep on her side of the bed, curled around her phone like it was oxygen. I walked downstairs, opened my laptop, and began transferring every shared expense back into my personal account. Rent, utilities, subscriptions, everything she thought simply took care of itself. Even Venmo, the quiet highway of our financial life, showed its history emptying out as I redirected every line back to me alone. It wasn't revenge. It was a reset. By the time she came down for her morning routine, the shift had already happened. She moved through the kitchen like always, grabbing her bag, opening a Pepsi, barely glancing at me. She said she had another long meeting and asked if I could cover her card bill just this once. She said it lightly, assuming the answer would be yes. I nodded without agreeing. She didn't notice the difference. When she left, I didn't go to work. I drove the truck out of the driveway and kept going, farther than usual, until the town felt like something behind me, not around me. I turned off my phone. Not airplane mode, off. Complete silence. No pings, no notifications, no requests. Just the hum of the engine and the kind of space a man only finds when he stops trying to be useful. I parked in a lot behind a Home Depot a few towns over, a place where no one knew my name and no one would think to look for me. I sat in the truck and watched the sky lighten. There was no rage inside me, just a strange, settled clarity. She'd made choices. Now she would feel the weight of them without me holding up the other side. Around noon, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen lit up like a fire alarm. Missed calls, messages stacking on top of each other. She wrote that her card kept getting declined, that her work expenses weren't going through, that she hoped I wasn't being dramatic. I didn't respond. I didn't even open them. Disappearing isn't always leaving. Sometimes it's simply stopping the flow of attention, money, and presence a person assumed they were entitled to. And by evening, she still had no idea where I was or who I had become. I didn't go home that night. I stayed parked behind the same Home Depot, watching workers roll carts of lumber past my windshield while the sun went down. I wasn't hiding. I was giving myself distance, enough space to see the situation without the fog of routine. Emily kept calling, then texting, then calling again. Each message grew sharper, like she was slowly understanding that her script no longer matched my silence. I didn't open any of them. Silence was the first move. The second came unexpectedly. Around noon the next day, Mark sent me a video. No caption, no explanation, just a clip recorded discreetly from across a parking lot. Emily and her boss, Greg, walking out of a restaurant, her hand brushing his arm like they had practiced it. The way she leaned in, the way he smiled down at her, it wasn't passion. It was negotiation, the kind that benefits only one side. I didn't feel jealousy. What I felt was confirmation, and confirmation has a way of sharpening a man's focus. I thought about driving over there, confronting them, making a scene. But that would have given both of them too much credit. Instead, I remembered something Mark had mentioned once. Greg had a reputation for cutting corners, especially with expense reports. A quiet rumor around town that he used company funds for things that weren't exactly professional. And if there's one thing I know how to do, it's read the signs of something wired wrong. So I went to the truck, turned it on, and drove to a spot with decent cell service. I didn't text Emily. I didn't text Greg. I sent an anonymous tip to the company's compliance department. Screenshots of public Venmo transactions, not hers, his. Patterns of payments labeled consulting fees that matched nights he claimed to be at corporate training. It wasn't enough to destroy him, just enough to make people look closer. Then I sat back and watched the first tremor hit. An hour later, Emily texted that her boss had been pulled into a sudden internal review. She said it like she had no idea why it happened, like she hadn't been standing right next to him in that parking lot. I looked at the message for a long second, then set the phone face down. This wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Structures fall when the weight they're built on isn't real, and all I did was stop holding it up. The fallout didn't take long. By the next morning, Emily's messages had shifted from irritated to confused, then to something closer to fear. She said her boss had been escorted out of a meeting, that HR had pulled his expense reports, that people were whispering in the hallways. She wrote that it felt weird, like everyone suddenly knew something she didn't. I read the messages, but didn't respond. Silence had become its own language, and she was finally hearing it. I drove back into town just before noon, not to see her, but to pick up a few things I actually needed. Practical things. I walked into Target for the first time in months, not because I liked the place, but because it reminded me how much of her world had been built on unnecessary purchases she justified as maintaining an image. I bought nothing for her, just a set of thermal socks for work and a small toolbox insert I'd been meaning to replace. When I stepped back into the parking lot, the phone buzzed again, this time from her sister, Megan. She asked if I was okay, then hesitated before mentioning she had seen Emily crying in a conference room. She said their co-workers looked uncomfortable. People weren't taking sides, but they were definitely stepping back from her. Megan didn't know why. I did. Emily ran on reputation, and reputations crack quietly before they shatter loudly. When I didn't respond, she sent one more message, saying Emily had tried to use her card at lunch, and it got declined twice. She joked that Emily blamed the machine, but everyone could see the panic under her smile. It wasn't humiliation. It was exposure. The life she performed didn't match the one she actually had, and people were finally noticing the gap. Later that afternoon, Emily sent a long message saying she didn't understand what was happening, that everything felt like it was slipping at once, her boss, her finances, her image at work. She said she hoped I wasn't withholding things to make a point. I didn't withhold anything. I had simply stepped out of the role she wrote for me. That evening, I opened a Pepsi at the kitchen counter of a friend's workshop where I was staying for the night. No noise, no tension, just space. Meanwhile, she was learning a truth she'd spent years ignoring. When a man stops carrying someone, they feel their real weight for the first time. Isolation changes tone before it changes shape. At first it looked like distance, her messages coming in softer, her sentences shorter, the confidence drained out of her punctuation. Then it started sounding like desperation she didn't know how to word. She wrote that people at work were acting weird, that no one wanted to sit with her during lunch, that even small conversations ended with polite smiles and quick excuses. She said she felt like she was standing outside her own life, watching it move without her. I read every word. I answered none of them. I wasn't hiding from her. I was done being the ground she walked over. The friend whose workshop I was staying in kept to himself, giving me space. I spent most of the day at his bench, cleaning my tools, reorganizing wiring kits I hadn't looked through in years. Being around the scent of metal and sawdust reminded me of who I was before Emily's world replaced mine. Steady, grounded, clear. She used to say my work clothes smelled like permanent effort, half teasing. Now the silence around me felt cleaner than her jokes ever did. Late afternoon, she tried calling again, then texting that she was stopping by the house. I let the message sit. She didn't know I wasn't there. She didn't know I hadn't been there for days. She didn't know anything anymore, because she had never bothered to look past the surface. She wrote again, saying she opened the fridge and saw nothing but a few cans of Pepsi and leftover containers she didn't remember buying. She said the kitchen felt empty, like it belonged to someone who had already left. She wasn't wrong. An hour later, Megan texted me. She said Emily looked shaken coming out of a meeting where HR recommended she take some personal time. No accusations, no warnings, just those corporate phrased nudges that mean everyone has already formed their opinions. Megan said Emily looked around the lobby as if expecting me to walk in and fix everything. That was the moment I understood the depth of her isolation. Not because I wasn't answering her, but because she finally realized how little she had built that was truly hers. Her world had leaned on two men, one for attention, one for stability. And now both were gone in the same week. I sat in the truck outside the workshop, engine off, watching the last of the daylight fade. She wanted independence. She finally had it. But independence without support feels a lot like being stranded. She finally found me on a Thursday evening, though not because I made myself visible. She drove by the workshop after Megan mentioned she'd seen my truck around that side of town. I heard her car pull in, the gravel crunching under tires that didn't belong anywhere near this place. I didn't move from the bench. I kept stripping the end of a wire, slow and steady, like her arrival was just another background sound. When she stepped inside, she paused in the doorway as if the air itself felt different. Maybe it did. This space wasn't built for performance. It was built for work, for clarity, for men who didn't speak unless there was a reason. She said she had been worried. She said the house felt wrong without me. She said everything had been falling apart since I changed tone. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was small, careful, like she was trying to find the right combination to unlock something she had taken for granted. I didn't rush to fill the space for her. Silence wasn't a weapon now. It was a boundary, one she'd never had to face. She asked if we could talk. She spoke softly, as if loudness might shatter what little control she still held. She mentioned her boss being suspended pending investigation, said people at work were whispering, said HR told her to go home early because she looked unwell. She said none of it made sense, that it felt like the universe was collapsing all at once. I listened. That's all. She kept trying to explain herself without actually saying anything real. She talked about stress, pressure, opportunities, how Greg misread things, how she never meant for any of this to happen. She didn't apologize. She justified. That was her language. I wiped my hands on a rag and finally looked at her. Her eyes searched mine like they used to when she wanted reassurance. This time she found nothing familiar. Just distance. Distance she couldn't close with charm or excuses. She asked if I was punishing her. I didn't answer. Punishment requires attachment. What I had now was absence. She said she wanted to fix things. She needed to understand what was happening. She needed me to tell her what to do. But the truth was simple. I had already stepped out of the life she was desperately trying to pull me back into. And she could feel it, heavier than any words I could have spoken. Collapse doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It comes in stages, each one stripping away a layer she thought would always protect her. After she left the workshop that night, the messages started again, longer, shakier, with fewer excuses and more fragments of truth she couldn't yet say out loud. She wrote that HR had officially suspended Greg pending a full audit of his expense records. She said people at work were avoiding eye contact, that even her closest work friend kept conversations short, as if proximity to her might pull them into the same sinking current. She didn't mention guilt. She mentioned reputation. That was the first sign the fall had begun. Later that evening, Megan texted me again. She said Emily had shown up at her place unexpectedly, makeup smudged, eyes tense, asking if she knew where I was staying. Megan said Emily looked scared, but not in a way that asked for comfort, in a way that asked for rescue. Megan didn't offer it. She told her she should talk to her husband directly. Emily left shortly after, realizing no one was stepping in this time. Her safety net had been woven by other people, and now every thread she reached for was slipping out of her grasp. The next morning, she tried to distract herself the way she always did, with routine. She went to Dunkin', tried to order her usual coffee, but her card was declined again. She wrote later that she laughed it off in front of the cashier, pretending it was a glitch. But she said the moment she got back to her car, her hands shook. Not from financial fear. She had always assumed money would come from somewhere. What rattled her was the realization she no longer knew where somewhere was. She had lost access to the stability she'd built her life on, and there was no one to call who would fix it. That afternoon, she returned to the house and found it exactly as she'd described before. Quiet, stripped of her rhythm, the kitchen still holding those untouched Pepsi cans like reminders of how silent things had become. She wrote that she sat on the floor and tried to understand how everything she depended on had collapsed so quickly. But the truth was simple. It hadn't collapsed quickly. It had collapsed the moment the person carrying it stepped away. I returned home on a Sunday morning, not because she asked, but because the silence had already done its work. The house felt lighter, as if the air had finally settled into honesty. I placed my tool bag on the kitchen table, the same table where she used to rehearse presentations and sip her Dunkin' coffee like it was part of her identity. Now it sat untouched, cold, a reminder of a life she no longer controlled. She arrived about an hour later. I heard her car in the driveway, then the hesitant click of the front door. She stepped in slowly, as if the house might reject her. When she saw me, something in her face fell apart. Not dramatically, not for sympathy. It was the look of someone recognizing the final stage of a collapse they spent weeks denying. She asked if we could talk. The words came out thin, almost whispered. I didn't rush to fill the silence for her. She said she knew she had broken something she couldn't name. She said the past week had felt like being dropped into cold water, job unraveling, people pulling away, finances tightening around her like a noose she didn't expect. She said she finally understood that she had treated affection like a transaction and stability like a guarantee. She didn't cry. She looked emptied out, stripped of the persona she lived behind. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't performing. She said she didn't want money, didn't want favors, didn't want saving. She just wanted to understand if there was anything left to rebuild. I finished tightening the latch on my tool bag before I answered. I told her quietly that I hadn't disappeared. I had stopped showing up in places where I wasn't respected. The words weren't sharp. They were simply true, delivered the way a man states a fact about a broken circuit. Neutral, clear, final. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, the mask was gone. What stood there wasn't the curated marketing manager or the woman who played power games with her boss. It was just Emily, tired, humbled, finally aware of the cost of treating love like leverage. I walked past her toward the garage, pulling on the new work gloves I'd bought at Home Depot earlier that week. She followed me halfway, stopping at the doorway, waiting to see if the distance was permanent. I didn't leave. I didn't promise anything either. I just stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle between us, no longer heavy, just honest. She needed to feel the weight of that pause. Then I said the only thing that mattered. I wasn't ending anything. I was resetting it. On terms where respect wasn't optional. On terms she'd have to rise to, not manipulate. Whatever came next would be rebuilt, not performed, not purchased, not negotiated. Real, or not at all. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.